All right, today we are diving into a really fascinating and, let's be honest, pretty unconventional theory. It's all about connecting today's biggest headlines to a forgotten American military plan from nearly 100 years ago. So yeah, let's get right into it.
The whole idea we're exploring today kicks off with this one really provocative question. It basically asks you to rethink everything you hear on the news about who America's rivals are. What if the main adversary isn't who we're told it is, day in and day out?
So who are we talking about, right? You know the usual suspects. We hear constantly about Russia and China. But the theory our source material lays out points to a very different antagonist, one that's straight out of the history books, the British Empire. The core of the argument is that this old rivalry, well, it never really ended. To even start to get our heads around this, we've got to go back, way back. This whole section is about digging up a strategic mindset that, according to the source, has been buried for the better part of a century.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. The central idea is that a bunch of political moves happening right now, things that seem totally disconnected, suddenly click into place. But they only make sense if you look at them through the lens of a conflict that was very, very real to U.S. military planners back in the 1920s.
And that brings us to the historical anchor for this entire theory. It's a real plan, with a name that sounds like it's straight out of a Cold War movie. Let's get into what War Plan Red actually was.
And there it is, War Plan Red. This was not some professor's thought experiment. It was a real, detailed, honest-to-goodness plan for a potential war between the United States and the British Empire, who were codenamed Red, and the most likely battleground, right next door, in Canada. This historical fact is the absolute linchpin for the source's entire modern-day argument.
And the source points to the Addams family to show just how deep this rivalry ran. I mean, think about this for a second. In the 1860s, you have the grandfather fighting a diplomatic war to keep Britain from siding with the Confederacy. Then, just 2 generations later, his own grandson is the one approving War Plan Red, a plan for a hot war with that very same empire.
So what's the fundamental issue here? According to the source, it's an ideological clash. The idea is that a self-governing republic and a globe-spanning empire are like oil and water. They just don't mix. The source argues that since World War II, we've papered over this tension with alliances, but the conflict itself was never actually resolved. It's just been dormant.
Okay, so how does any of this old history connect to today? Well, the theory makes a sharp pivot from the 1920s to a very recent geopolitical flashpoint, the American interest in Greenland.
Remember that? The source claims that the mere suggestion caused an absolute panic within the foreign policy establishment. It points to headlines like this one, NATO's darkest hour. I mean, that's not just polite disagreement, that's a 5-alarm fire. The argument is that this was seen as a direct threat to the entire alliance. And it goes deeper. The source cites Chatham House, a major British think tank, which basically raised the alarm that the U.S. was destroying the credibility of Article 5, the "an attack on one is an attack on all" core of NATO. Just think about that. The implication is that NATO allies were trying to figure out how to protect a fellow member from the United States.
So what does all that frantic reaction add up to? The source's conclusion is that this wasn't just some awkward diplomatic moment. No, this was the sound of the entire post-World War II Atlantic system, that whole web of alliances that has defined the West for 75 years, beginning to crack under the strain.
But why on earth Greenland? The theory argues it's really about taking on colonialism. It paints Greenland not as an equal partner with Denmark, but as a territory that still has its foreign policy and defense run from Europe. And here's the kicker. The source claims that opposition leaders in Greenland actually wanted to bypass Denmark and deal directly with the U.S. themselves.
And now the theory takes a really sharp turn. It says this strategic fight isn't just happening on some remote Arctic island. It's happening right here at home, against what the source calls domestic cartels.
The source gets super specific, naming 3 main targets: big institutional investors in the housing market, giant insurance companies in healthcare, and of course, the military-industrial complex. The claim is these aren't 3 separate problems, they're all connected parts of a single system of control.
Let's just use the housing plan as an example of the strategy. The source describes it as a 3-step attack. First, you stop the big Wall Street funds from buying up any more family homes. Second, you make them sell off the houses they already own. The end goal? Flood the market with supply and, in theory, crash the prices so that normal families can afford to buy a home again.
The approach to healthcare is described with a similar logic. Cut out the middleman.
Instead of funneling subsidies to massive insurance corporations, the source points to a push for a simple, revolutionary idea. Just give the healthcare money directly to the American people.
And finally, defense. Here, the source highlights a demand for the big contractors to stop playing Wall Street games and start actually building stuff again. The message is simple. Stop using taxpayer money for stock buybacks and start building the ships and planes the country actually needs.
Okay, so you've got Greenland, you've got the housing market, you've got defense spending. What in the world do these things have in common? This is the moment where the theory tries to weave everything together into one single story.
And here it is, the grand thesis. The argument is that these are not separate policies. They are all different fronts in one single undeclared war. A war against a global system of control that, according to this theory, uses institutions like NATO abroad and these monopolistic cartels at home.
This final quote from the source really just puts it all out there. It frames this whole thing in huge historical terms, tying it all the way back to 1776. It's not just about policy, it's being presented as the final chapter of the American Revolution.
So we're left with this pretty staggering question. Is this a lens that reveals a hidden centuries-long conflict playing out right in front of us? Or is it just a new and creative way to make sense of modern politics? The source lays out a compelling case, presenting a framework where nothing is random, and every single move has a much, much deeper meaning. It's definitely something to think about.